Let's jump right into this explainer. Picture this. It's 1855, and the French colonial empire is launching a massive invasion into Senegal. But the fiercest resistance they faced, it actually didn't come from a king. Today, we're diving into the untold, fully documented reality of Queen Nande Yala Mbodj. We'll be looking closely at her life, her reign, her military expansion, and her absolutely fierce resistance against the French invasion of Wallo. So who actually led this resistance? Well, when the French forces rolled in, they crashed headfirst into a brilliantly trained queen from the Kingdom of Wallo. Now, let's be clear, she wasn't some symbolic figurehead, not at all. This was a ruler with absolute authority, someone who posed a massive, very real military threat to one of the most powerful, rapidly expanding empires on the planet at the time. To really wrap our heads around her power, we've got to look at the system that created her. Nande Yala was the very last Lingeer of Wallo. Born in 1810 to a highly influential royal family, she was raised in a matrilineal court. And this is crucial. Female leadership here was structural. It wasn't just a fluke, or some desperate measure during a crisis. She was rigorously trained in statecraft, diplomacy, and hardcore military strategy because she was the rightful, fully expected heir to the throne. Now, you might have heard the pervasive myth that Nande Yala was just this historical anomaly, right? Like a lone female ruler who happened to take charge. Actually, scratch that. The documented reality paints a completely different picture. Her older sister, Njumbo Imbaje, literally held the throne right before she did. So when Nande Yala was crowned Lingeer on October 1st, 1846, in what is now St. Louis, she was simply carrying on a centuries-old tradition of deep-rooted female sovereignty. And from that coronation in 1846, things escalated at absolute lightning speed. Literally just 1 year later, in 1847, she outright rejected French demands, which directly set the stage for a massive invasion. It sparked a fierce, brutal resistance that she would actually survive, eventually passing away in Dagana in 1860. It's just a wild, intense timeline where indigenous sovereignty collides right into foreign colonialism. Let's zoom in on that pivotal moment in 1847 for a second. Queen Nande Yala was ruling alongside her warrior husband, governing as this incredible powerhouse of a team. And they had a massive turning point when France arrogantly tried to flex its muscles. The French didn't just ask nicely for a favor, they demanded free passage and the right to collect taxes directly through Wallo territory. This wasn't a friendly negotiation at all. It was a demand for total subjugation, and France expected full compliance. But compliance is the absolute last thing they got. Her complete defiance is perfectly captured in a direct, written refusal to the French governor. She wrote, "Each leader governs his country as he pleases." Just take a second to really appreciate the strength and clarity there. Staring down a rapidly expanding global empire demanding her money and land, she didn't mince words. She offered zero compromises. She laid it out plainly. Wallo was a sovereign nation, she was its sovereign ruler, and her country was hers alone to govern. End of story. Her military genius is another area completely shrouded in myth. The popular story goes that she magically conjured this women's army out of thin air just to fight the French. Well, the truth is way more strategic than that. She actually took a pre-existing tradition of female fighters and massively expanded it into a highly lethal army. In fact, historical sources compare her forces directly to the famous Dahomey Amazons. So the tradition was already there, but she took it, weaponized it, and turned it into an undeniably formidable military force. 15,000 troops. That is massive. When the French governor finally invaded in 1855, he wasn't just sending some small exploratory scouting party. That staggering number alone tells us everything we need to know about how seriously France took the military threat of Wallo. They knew for a fact they were going up against a highly organized, heavily armed resistance, and they realized they had to bring an overwhelming force if they had any hope of crushing it. But here's the thing. The French made a fatal tactical error right from the jump. They targeted Wallo first, specifically because it was led by a woman. Because of their own heavy biases, they looked at indigenous female leadership and mistakenly equated it with weakness. They thought, hey, a kingdom ruled by a queen. That'll be a quick, easy victory to kick off our campaign. Boy, were they wrong. Instead of an easy win, they walked right into months of brutal, highly lethal guerrilla warfare. Wallo didn't just roll over. They fought fiercely, using the local terrain and that newly expanded army to make the French bleed for every single inch of ground before the kingdom finally fell. Now, perhaps the biggest myth of the whole shebang surrounds her actual defeat. If you look at standard history books, they often claim she died in battle when Wallo fell in 1855. But guess what? She didn't. She actually escaped. She successfully fled to Cayor, where her family fiercely protected her and completely defied French demands to hand over the queen. Because of that incredible loyalty, she outlived the invasion entirely, surviving for 5 more years before peacefully passing away in Dagenma in 1860. She quite literally never surrendered to the French. And her legacy of resistance definitely didn't end in 1860 either. Her son carried the torch, continuing that fierce fight against the French for nearly 2 more decades, until he was eventually captured and died in exile in Gabon in 1878. Today, Queen Data Yala Mbodj's memory is permanently set in stone in Dagana, where a prominent statue of her stands, and, get this, she remains the only queen honored with a national statue in the entire country. It's a permanent physical reminder of her incredible stand. So what does this all mean? Ultimately, her story is about so much more than just a single invasion. We are looking at a total clash of 2 entirely different systems here. Pre-colonial Wallo featured this structural female leadership and a fierce defense of its territorial sovereignty. Meanwhile, French colonial rule was all about the systematic dismantling of that exact power and the intentional erasure of local leadership models. The Queen's true legacy is providing documented proof that powerful female leadership wasn't something foreign to West Africa. It was entirely indigenous, it was structural, and it thrived, right up until colonial rule deliberately tried to wipe it off the map. Her insistence that her country was hers alone to govern remains an absolutely vital blueprint for defending sovereignty today. But honestly, it leaves us with a highly provocative question to chew on. If colonial rule purposefully erased this documented proof of indigenous female power, literally mistaking it for weakness and then trying to scrub it from the history books, what other powerful indigenous systems of leadership were dismantled and hidden from our history?